"If we can't hold Alamein alive, we'll hold it in death," said British Lieutenant General Bernard Montgomery to his 8th Army in October 1942. Positioned at a barren railway stop in Egypt, roughly 60 miles from Alexandria, Montgomery pressed forward, fueled by intelligence even Hitler lacked. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, commander of the feared Africa Corps, was running dangerously low on fuel. But where Rommel lacked gas for his tanks, he compensated with a deadly trick up his sleeve. The Allies came to know it as the Devil's Garden, Rommel's most lethal setup in the North African war front. British Sherman and Crusader tanks found themselves stuck in the blistering 100-degree desert heat, ideal targets for German 88mm guns, initially made for aircraft, but now deployed as tank killers. The only way to reach Rommel was to breach this mine-riddled nightmare, and within it, death waited to stain the sand red. By 1941, Hitler had grown openly furious with the Italian military's disastrous campaign in North Africa. Mussolini's advance into Egypt had collapsed, forcing his troops into a shrinking strip of Libya while the British took advantage, capturing ports and positioning to challenge Axis control. Convinced the job needed German intervention, Hitler sent in an elite unit, the Africa Corps. Under the bold leadership of General Erwin Rommel, they wasted no time and launched a sudden assault that quickly turned the tide. The British, having crushed the Italians, were confident and unprepared for a comeback. But Rommel drove them forcefully back into Egyptian territory. However, the strategic port of Tobruk, defended by Australian forces, held out against Rommel's storm for 8 relentless months. The defenders endured daily bombardments from air and land. Rommel tried everything, but Tobruk wouldn't fall. Only in December 1941, when the Allies launched Operation Crusader, did they finally break through and drive Rommel out, though he bled resources throughout his retreat. Believing Rommel had been permanently dealt with, the British relaxed their guard. That proved costly. On January 21, 1942, Rommel counterattacked with astonishing speed. His fast-paced tactics caught the Allies unprepared and drove them once again toward Tobruk. As he advanced, the British scrambled to reinforce the town, digging defenses, laying traps, and installing barbed wire and mines. Rommel's first direct assault failed, so he adjusted. On May 27th, he shifted to a southern approach that almost cracked the defenses. When that faltered, he quickly faked a western push before smashing through the northwest with the help of Italian troops. By June 11th, Tobruk's outer ring had collapsed, and the city was encircled. Inside Tobruk, chaos took over as conflicting commands circulated. General Ritchie was trapped between orders to hold the city and instructions to destroy all useful assets if retreat became necessary. Eventually, he withdrew, leaving the 2nd South African Division to defend alone. On June 20th, Rommel launched a ferocious assault. German planes rained destruction from above, artillery dismantled defenses, and engineers built bridges across tank traps. Rommel's armor rolled in. The defenders at Pilastrino Ridge fought bravely, but German forces broke through. Soldiers fleeing were cut down or captured. That night, Axis troops seized the city and vast stockpiles of supplies. The following day, June 21st, the British surrendered Tobruk. More than 32,000 Allied troops became prisoners of war. Winston Churchill was devastated, calling it not just a defeat, but a disgrace. Rommel, now promoted to Field Marshal, strengthened his legendary status and turned the North African campaign on its head. Tobruk's fall in June 1942 sent shockwaves across both continents. German and Italian media predicted Egypt's swift fall and celebrated what they saw as the coming conquest of Cairo, and the Suez Canal. Mussolini, caught up in the triumph, arrived in Tripoli on a white horse, dressed like a parade leader, already fantasizing about marching into Cairo. But Rommel stayed grounded, focused on military goals. He used the captured supplies, fuel, trucks, and ammunition, to push his forces eastward against the struggling British Eighth Army. Just 3 days after Tobruk fell, Rommel advanced toward Mersa Matruh, sensing a vulnerable enemy. Alarmed, the British appointed General Auchinleck to stabilize the situation. Surveying his worn-out troops, Auchinleck wisely chose to retreat to El Alamein, a spot offering natural defensive advantages, bordered by the sea to the north and the impassable Qattara Depression to the south. Rommel's fast-moving style would be less effective there. At Mersa Matruh, a New Zealand division faced annihilation. In a bold nighttime charge, 10,000 Kiwis stormed German lines with bayonets fixed. Though 6,000 were lost, the breakout became a symbol of determination. The retreat to El Alamein covered 109 scorching miles. Auchinleck quickly strengthened ridges like Miteraya, Ruvaisat, and Alam el Halfa with armored support. By the time Rommel's worn-out troops reached the area, their supplies were low and spirits fragile. On July 1st, Rommel launched an assault, but ran straight into minefields and relentless artillery. Every push was met with fierce resistance. Auchinleck unleashed a counterblow, sending tanks to strike Rommel's southern flank during blinding sandstorms. Rommel's experienced 90th Light Division was routed by South African troops, while the Italian Ariete Division was shattered by New Zealand forces. The battle at Ruwaisat Ridge was brutal. Captain Charles Upham, though wounded multiple times, led attacks and earned a rare second Victoria Cross. Even Rommel later admitted those days were among his worst. But tension among Allied forces began to surface. Australian and New Zealand commanders criticized British leadership following several failed tank engagements. Nevertheless, El Alamein marked the end of Rommel's drive toward Cairo and Alexandria. Despite heavy losses, Auchinleck succeeded in halting the Axis surge and forcing Rommel to confront the limits of his campaign. Over the summer, reinforcements slowly trickled into North Africa. Around 24,000 German troops and 11,000 Luftwaffe personnel arrived in worn-out transport planes, but they lacked crucial equipment, no artillery, tanks, or enough ammunition. They were simply more soldiers for Rommel's overburdened supply lines to support. One bright spot was the arrival of the Ramke Parachute Brigade, 4,000 tough paratroopers under General Bernhard Ramke, eager to fight. Yet even their toughness couldn't change Rommel's deteriorating position. Fuel was critically low, as Allied ships and aircraft relentlessly attacked Axis supply convoys. Thanks to intercepted German communications through the cracked Enigma code, known as Ultra, Montgomery knew exactly how bad Rommel's fuel crisis was. Anticipating a strike on Alam el Halfa Ridge, Montgomery carefully prepared. He placed the fresh 44th Infantry Division alongside experienced troops, set up anti-tank guns, and deployed 170 American Grant tanks in protected positions. His strategy was clear. Don't charge, stand firm, and make Rommel do the hard work. Rommel, running out of options but still tactically sharp, devised a bold plan. He would fake an assault at the center and swing his tanks around the British southern side, then cut north to trap them before heading to Alexandria. The most daring part involved parachuting Ramke's unit and Italian troops to seize bridges near Cairo and Alexandria. But logistical challenges canceled the airborne part, leaving only the ground attack. As night fell on August 30th, Rommel made his move. The Afrika Korps pushed forward, aiming to hit the British from the south, using their fast movement, which had worked so well in the past. But instead of getting through quickly, they ran into carefully placed British minefields. British planes dropped flares that lit up the area, making it easy for artillery to target the Axis troops. The shelling was intense. By morning, Rommel's forces had made it through the mines, but they were already damaged and worn down. And now they faced British tanks waiting on Alamein Ridge. Rommel noticed his fuel supply was running low and thought about stopping the attack. But Major General Bayerlein convinced him to keep going, suggesting they turn north sooner to save both time and fuel. Rommel agreed, though he wasn't confident. A strong sandstorm hit the battlefield, grounding British planes and giving the Axis time to refuel. But by the afternoon, the weather cleared up, and now the German and Italian tanks were in clear view of British guns. From the ridge, British soldiers saw 120 German tanks coming straight at them. The Germans fired first. Their guns could shoot farther than the British ones and hit some targets. But the British didn't panic. They stayed where they were, following orders. As the German tanks got closer, hidden British anti-tank guns waited. When the tanks were just 300 yards away, the British opened fire and caught them by surprise. The Germans had expected the British to rush in recklessly, as they had done before. But this time, the British had a trap, and it worked. The Germans fought hard, but they lost many tanks. Rommel's usual trick had failed badly. That night, Rommel pulled his tanks back. Both sides had lost about 20 tanks and spent the night trying to fix damaged ones. Montgomery took advantage of Rommel's problems and sent planes to attack the Axis supply lines in the dark. The next morning, Rommel tried again, hoping to make the British move their tanks. But Montgomery didn't fall for it. He had figured out how Rommel operated. British planes attacked the exposed Axis forces again, forcing another retreat. By September 6th, Rommel had returned to where he had started. He still held Himmelmatt Ridge, but Montgomery didn't mind. He wanted Rommel to see the fake British buildings and equipment there to confuse him about their future plans. The Battle of Alam el Halfa had cost the Axis around 2,800 casualties and many tanks and vehicles. The British lost fewer soldiers, about 1,750, and came out on top both in the fight and in strategy. Some of Rommel's officers argued over what went wrong. Some believed Rommel had hesitated too much. Others thought pushing harder would have destroyed his entire tank force. Either way, the loss was a major blow to the once powerful Afrika Korps. Montgomery faced two major tasks. He had to beat Rommel in battle, but first, he had to rebuild the British Eighth Army's confidence. Rommel, even though he was very sick with stomach and liver problems, high blood pressure, sinus pain, and exhaustion, still had a powerful presence. British soldiers talked about him with both fear and respect, as if he were more than human. Montgomery knew he had to create his own strong image to match that. At first, he wore an Australian soldier's hat covered in badges, but soon he switched to a black beret from the Royal Tank Corps and even painted Monty on his command tank. It was risky, making himself such a clear target, but it sent a strong message that he was in charge. Still, Montgomery knew looks alone wouldn't win a war. His troops needed solid training and confidence. Churchill wanted a fast attack, but Montgomery refused to rush. He began tough training sessions, pulling brigades away from the front to put them through hard, realistic exercises. Soldiers practiced clearing mines, working with tanks and infantry, fighting at night, and staying in communication during chaos. They practiced using artillery and air support until it became natural. Montgomery wanted every move in battle to be automatic and precise. To trick the enemy, Montgomery created a detailed plan in the southern part of the Alamein line. They built fake tanks, fake command centers, and false supply points. They even faked radio messages and kept troops visibly active so German spies would think the British were preparing for a big attack there. Meanwhile, the real British forces moved quietly into the north for the actual assault. As the battle drew near, Montgomery's speeches became more intense. He told his officers to push their men hard and build excitement for the upcoming fight. On September 23, 1942, Montgomery got a lucky break. Rommel left for Germany due to health issues, and General Georg Stumme took over. Stumme had good experience in France and Russia, but he wasn't Rommel. While Rommel was being honored in Germany, Montgomery used the opportunity to strengthen his army's morale and leadership. However, Rommel had left a tough defense behind. The area was filled with 500,000 mines, some for tanks, some for soldiers. These were protected by machine guns, artillery, and the deadly 88mm anti-tank guns that could destroy any Allied tank. German and Italian troops held the front line, with tank divisions placed behind them for counterattacks. More backup forces waited near the coast, ready in case the British tried a beach landing. Montgomery had a lot of troops, 19,500 soldiers, over 1,000 tanks, 2,300 artillery guns, and 530 planes. But he knew numbers alone wouldn't break through Rommel's lines. He had to turn his army into a well-coordinated machine. The Desert Air Force, now flying Spitfires and American B-25 bombers, controlled the skies and became a key part of the plan. Montgomery reorganized his army into 3 corps, the 30th and 13th with mostly infantry, and the 10th with tanks. His front line stretched for 40 miles and included soldiers from across the British Empire. Australians, New Zealanders, Highlanders, South Africans, Indians, Greeks, French, and British. Behind them, the armored divisions waited, ready to charge if a gap opened up. Montgomery's plan focused on causing confusion. He would attack both the north and south at the same time, so the Axis wouldn't know where the real strike was coming from. In the north, the 30th Corps would break through near Materia Ridge and the sea, opening the way for the 10th Corps' tanks to attack the Axis armor. In the south, the 13th Corps would try to capture Haimaimat Ridge to force Axis reserves to move too early. At the same time, the 7th Armored Division, known as the Desert Rats, would disrupt Axis supply lines. As the battle got closer, keeping their movements secret became harder. During the day, soldiers stayed hidden in their trenches, barely moving. At night, they came out just long enough to eat, smoke, and drink their treasured Navy rum, the kind they saved for what could be their last night. At 9 o'clock, under a bright full moon, the infantry quietly moved into position to begin the attack. They weren't just trying to get through Rommel's tricky minefields and machine gun defenses. The real goal was to destroy the legend of the Desert Fox himself. At exactly 9:25 p.m., the silence of the southern desert broke as 230 British artillery guns started firing at German positions. What had been a quiet night suddenly turned loud and violent. 10 minutes later, bombers from the Desert Air Force flew overhead, their engines rumbling as they passed over the moonlit sand. The northern area was still quiet, but that didn't last long. At 9:40 p.m., 460 more artillery guns opened fire up north, and aircraft joined in, dropping bombs from above. British soldiers, nervous but determined, stood up and moved forward into a deadly zone filled with mines, known as the Devil's Garden. 500,000 mines were buried there. The 51st Highland Division charged forward with fixed bayonets, their bagpipes playing loud over the chaos. A young piper named Duncan McIntyre, only 19 years old, led the way playing Highland Laddie. His music kept going until a burst of machine gun fire ended his life. Their mission was incredibly dangerous. They had to clear narrow paths through minefields while being shot at by hidden guns and targeted by enemy artillery. In the north, New Zealand troops supported by the 9th Armoured Brigade attacked the Mitiria Ridge. At the same time, South African forces with Valentine tanks attacked from the south. Despite heavy resistance, the New Zealanders reached their goal by morning and managed to clear some of the mines. But it came at a high price. 800 New Zealanders were killed or injured. The South Africans also captured most of their targets, but they left a risky opening on their northern side. British engineers worked low to the ground in the dark, under streams of enemy bullets and terrifying dive bomber attacks. Their mine detectors didn't work well, so they had to slowly feel the ground with bayonets, inch by inch. It was painfully slow and extremely dangerous. Some mines exploded at waist level, sending metal balls flying that ripped through their bodies. As paths were cleared, tanks and vehicles began moving in, but with lights off and sand swirling, confusion quickly spread. German flares lit up the night, making the vehicles easy targets. Tanks accidentally veered off path and hit mines, causing huge explosions. By sunrise, a massive traffic jam stretched across the desert under the burning sun. Everyone was exhausted. Drivers hadn't slept and started seeing things that weren't real. One driver, John McCaskill, later said he thought he was driving along a road lined with leafy trees, even though he knew the desert had nothing but sand in every direction. But Montgomery had made it clear there would be no retreat. He said if they lost at El Alamein, they would lose Egypt. He told them if they couldn't stay alive at Alamein, they would stay there dead. So the troops kept pushing forward, crawling through the night, leaving behind fallen friends every step of the way. In the south, the 13th Corps had to keep Rommel busy, so he couldn't send help to the north. Horrocks sent in the 7th Armored Division, followed by soldiers from the 44th and 50th Divisions, the Free French Brigade, and the 1st Greek Infantry Brigade. All of this was timed with the northern attacks. Things started off rough as the tanks with special mine-clearing gear kept breaking down, but eventually they broke through part of the Italian Folgore Parachute Division's lines. The Free French briefly took the Himeimat Hills before being hit hard by a German group called Kielgruppe. After losing their respected leader, Colonel Dimitris Amilakvari, the French lost morale. Kielgruppe stopped the 13th Corps completely, and the soldiers had to dig in and defend themselves while Axis paratroopers closed in around them. Montgomery's bombing and artillery had one unexpected effect. It caused so much confusion among Axis forces that General Stumm, under fire from Australians, had a heart attack and died. Lieutenant General von Thoma had to step in as temporary leader. By the morning of October 24th, the 30th Corps had partly succeeded, breaking into enemy lines with fewer losses than expected. But the 10th Corps tanks didn't move fast enough to use the opening. Montgomery was furious and threatened to fire some of his officers right away. Rommel returned to the battlefield just after midnight on October 25th, 2 days into the fight. His presence gave his tired troops new energy. What he saw was worrying. Montgomery's army had seriously damaged the northern lines, though they hadn't fully broken through. Most British tanks were still stuck behind their infantry, and German and Italian soldiers were fighting hard for every bit of ground. Rommel quickly figured out that Montgomery's attack in the south was just a trick, so he took a big risk and moved the powerful 21st Panzer Division north to defend Kidney Ridge, leaving only the Italian Ariete Division to hold the south. It was a dangerous move. If Montgomery had attacked the south again, Ariete would have been trapped, and Rommel's entire southern line would collapse. But Montgomery focused on the north. The battle around Kidney Ridge became extremely violent. Highlanders and Australians fought fiercely for control. Axis tanks, including Germany's 15th Panzer and Italy's Littorio Division, launched a desperate attack that lasted all day. The Littorio tanks suffered terribly. Many were hit, turning into flaming wrecks. Soldiers inside were burned alive, and some tanks kept moving even after the crew had died. For 6 terrible days, both sides launched attacks and counterattacks, losing huge numbers of men and machines. Over 2,000 Highlanders and more than 1,000 Australians were killed or wounded. In the end, both sides had to pull back, exhausted. But the Australians had taken an important position near the railway line, putting them in a dangerous spot close to Rommel's side. Montgomery was already getting ready for the next big strike, called Operation Supercharge. On November 2nd, at 1 a.m., British infantry units, the Durham Light Infantry, Highlanders, and New Zealand Maoris, moved forward behind a wall of explosions that cleared mines ahead of them. Anti-aircraft guns fired tracer rounds in the sky to guide them. By sunrise, most of the foot soldiers had reached their targets. But the tanks from the 9th Armored Brigade arrived late and drove straight into a deadly trap. The rising sun lit them up, and enemy guns fired relentlessly. Tank after tank caught fire and exploded. Still, in a wild charge that reminded some of the charge of the Light Brigade, the tanks pushed on, crushing enemy positions and weapons under their tracks. Armored cars slipped behind enemy lines, destroying fuel supplies and transport trucks. The price was heavy. 270 men died, and 71 tanks were destroyed. Then progress stalled again. Montgomery's second wave of tanks hesitated at a key moment. Rommel quickly reacted, sending what was left of his tank force into a final counterattack near Akakir. A brutal tank battle followed. The desert was soon covered with burning wreckage. Rommel was hopelessly outnumbered. He had fewer than 50 working tanks left, while Montgomery had 500. With hardly any anti-tank guns remaining, Rommel asked to retreat, trying to go against Hitler's insane orders not to surrender. When he finally got permission to pull back, the Axis lines collapsed. Soldiers fled in confusion and panic. In the south, the brave Folgore Airborne Division fought until they had no more bullets. Only 306 of the original 5,000 survived. German and Italian troops ran for their lives, many wounded or starving, with British forces chasing close behind. Local Senussi tribes searched the battlefield, looking for weapons and anything valuable. The Axis loss was complete. The battlefield was covered in blood, burned-out vehicles, and destruction. The 8th Army had about 13,500 casualties, roughly 8% of all who fought, most of them in the fierce northern fighting. Australia lost 2,827 men. The 51st Highland Division lost 2,495. The New Zealanders 2,388, and the South Africans 922. German and Italian losses were far worse. Around 30,000 were captured, and about 20,000 were killed or wounded. On November 15, 1942, Britain celebrated its major win at El Alamein by ringing church bells that had been silent since the war began. Churchill said the victory was not the end, but maybe the end of the beginning. As he spoke, Montgomery's 8th Army entered the battered port of Tobruk and chased Rommel's forces across Libya into Tunisia, where they were finally defeated by the spring of 1943. Montgomery became a national hero and later led Allied troops in Sicily, Italy, and Normandy. He was eventually given the honorific title Montgomery of Alamein.